y'all. Thank you for coming out, even though it's exam period. We really appreciate it, and we're so excited to have you all here. Obviously, my name is Rose. I think we've all mostly met. I'm the former president of Brown Dems.
I'm Zoe. I'm the new president of Brown Dems.
And it's a very sort of odd time of year because technically this is under the past board's purview, but also now we have a new board, so it's a whole thing. But in any case, we're so happy to see you, and I have the distinct pleasure and honor of introducing Congresswoman Hayes today. We're so thrilled that she's here and was able to make the trip out, and we really appreciate the time that she's taking to speak with us today. And we're so excited to present her with this award at the end of the program. So just for a brief outline, the Congresswoman will speak for a little bit. We'll then have a short question and answer period, and then we'll be able to present her with the award, and then we'll wrap up by around 3:45, just out of respect for the Congresswoman's time. So Congresswoman Jahana Hayes is a first-term representative and the first African-American woman to represent Connecticut in the House of Representatives. She was recognized by President Obama as the 2016 National Teacher of the Year, hailing from the John F. Kennedy High School in Waterbury, Connecticut. During her time in Congress, Representative Hayes has prioritized education, which is one of the main reasons that we invited her today to accept the John F. K. Jr. Award. This award is named after one of the founders of the Brown College Democrats, John F. Kennedy Jr. And this award is usually given to an elected official or someone involved in politics who's inspiring youth in political work, and also has a youth-centered focus in their advocacy. And that's one of the main reasons why we invited Congresswoman Hayes here today. We're so honored that she's come here to speak with us, and we'll just sort of give her the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me. I want to try to leave as much time as I can to have a conversation and a dialogue. So I'll just very briefly say, when I heard you talk about this award and what it means, I'm not really sure I qualify because I still don't see myself as a politician. I'm an educator. It's all I ever wanted to be. And I kind of accidentally became a congresswoman. And a lot of that is people talk a lot about I'm in Congress in spite of my circumstances, and I think just the opposite. I'm in Congress because of my circumstances. I think it's insane that we still have a sentence that begins with, I am the first African-American woman to represent the state of Connecticut in Congress. Really, it's 2019, but whatever, we fixed it finally. But just this idea of it's never been done, it can't be done, and I seem to think that the best way to predict the future is to create it, to decide that we want something different to happen. And so many people talk about 2018 and leading into 2020. First of all, I'm sorry, I digress. Thank you for inviting me here, and thank you for being Democrats. Let's just start with that. Because there's a lot of conversation about who Democrats are and what Democrats do. And the reason why I am a member of Congress is because I have a life that is draped in Democratic grace. I never thought I'd run for any office. This is my first elected office. I've never ran for anything, not school board, not PTA, not anything, missionary president, anything. So I'm 1 for 1 right now. And in a state and in a district, my district is 73% white, has never elected a representative of color. So the fact that I had no political background, no political experience, and I was a classroom teacher, people thought she's out of her mind, there's no way she can do this. But I think that my circuitous route to get to Congress really is a sobering reminder of how important it is for regular people to step up, for good people to step up. I talk a lot about my story and my journey to Congress. I grew up in public housing. I grew up in a family that struggled with addiction. My grandmother raised my brother and I. I was a teenage mom and a high school dropout. And all I ever wanted to be was a teacher. I started at community college, went back and got a 4-year degree, went back and got a master's degree, and then a 6-year educational leadership degree, and ultimately was recognized at the height of my profession as the National Teacher of the Year. And I tell this story often, but it really is indicative of my journey to Congress. In 2016, there was a transition in the Department of Education, and outgoing Secretary John King, who I'd worked very closely with on the Every Student Succeed Act, was leaving, and the incoming Secretary, Betsy DeVos, was coming in. And one of the first things she said to me at our first meeting, at our first opportunity to be together, was, I want to move government out the way so that parents can make the decision for their children. And I didn't say anything. And, my husband's nodding his head, and I'm like, husband, we don't like that. And he didn't understand why I had such a visceral reaction to that statement, because I said to him, what would have happened to a kid like me? What would have happened to someone who did not have a family that had the ability or the capacity to speak for them? Isn't that your job? Isn't that the job of government, to stand in intercession until people can stand for themselves, to provide equitable access to opportunities so that people can then themselves be contributors? Like I said, I had been the beneficiary of so much undeserved grace. But it wasn't just people who looked like me, people who lived in my community, people who shared my experiences. It was people who stood up and used their voice and their platform to do the right thing just because it was the right thing to do, who advocated for public education. I depended on public education. So when you start to strip away those things and say, we only want to make the experiences and the opportunities available for the people who already have the bandwidth to advocate for them. In my mind, you are excluding generations of people. And I knew personally that I would have been excluded. And it sounds like a great story in hindsight, but in the moment, I didn't speak up. I didn't say anything. And that crippled me for the next 24 months, because here I was as an educator being celebrated at the height of my profession as the top teacher in the nation, 3.5 million public school educators, and I had distinguished myself. But in that moment, I froze, because I was so incredibly just hollowed out by the idea that anybody still operated with that value set, that your only responsibility is to yourself and to your family, but not to your neighbors and not to their communities, and not as no higher level of responsibility or investment to others. So I didn't speak up. And I struggled with that. I wrestled with that. And for the next year, every time something happened, whether it was kids in cages at the border, whether it was healthcare, whether it was the right to organize, whether it was the environment, I was saying, I hope whoever is in the room at that moment is speaking up. And it haunted me. So literally yesterday made a year since I officially decided I was going to run for Congress. My campaign was 5 months beginning to end, and this is where I need for you all to sit up. Because I had a group of kids in California over spring break in April, and my Waterbury Public Schools, Title I, underperforming, 100% free and reduced lunch, but I saw the promise in those kids' potential. And what I said to them was, no matter how bad it is, you don't get to complain. What? So what? Now what? 1 minute on the what, 1 minute on the so what, the rest of our time is spent finding a solution to the problem. So this particular group of kids, about 7 years earlier, I started doing Habitat for Humanity. I started a club called the Hope Club, and the whole point of this club was, we started with about 46 kids and swelled to over 200 kids. The whole point of this club was helping out people everywhere. So if you saw a problem in your community, your job was to come up with a solution to how to solve it. And as a club and as a group, we would work together to do that. So we raised over $100,000 for the American Cancer Society. We adopted neighborhoods. We did citywide front porch cleanup. We started doing Walk for Autism, Relay for Life, Children's Dyslexia Awareness Center, after-school programs, like anything you can think of. And people thought, this teacher's just out of her mind. And it wasn't even me. It was like any problem a kid brought to me, I said, I don't care what anyone else is doing. You figure out how to do your part. So I had these kids in California building houses with Habitat for Humanity over spring break of last year, 2017. And I just described to you my community because that's very important. I had kids who had saw in the news that communities in California were devastated by fire, houses had burned to the ground, and they came to me and said, what can we do about it? We raised enough money. I took 17 kids on a plane across the country to build houses for someone else. These are kids who not one of them came from a family that owned a home. There is something incredibly humbling about the fact that these kids were willing to get on a plane to help someone else. And I says, how is it that young people are doing this and the adults who are in the room where it happens are not standing up? And literally, it started as simple as I had been approached by some people, and I thought, this is crazy. I can never do this. I'm not a politician. I don't have the money. I don't have the bandwidth. I don't have the network. But then when I saw these kids, I was like, you don't get to do nothing. You know, you do the best you can. Sometimes it's good enough, and sometimes it's not. But to do nothing is no longer an option. So literally, with a press release to my local newspaper, I declared I was running for Congress. And the next day, I thought, now how do I do this? Because, like I said, I had never run for public office, ever. Couple that with the fact that I was the first African American in a district that was 73% white. I had not raised a single fundraising dollar. Oh, and then there's the fact that I did not have the endorsement of the state party. And not only did I not have the endorsement, they were actively working against me. And someone said to me, you can never pull this off because you don't have a network. So then I'm thinking, well, let me think about this. Who do I know? If I have to start somewhere, where do you start? And you covet what you see. You first work within your network and within your community. And I had 3 groups: my church family, educators, and students. So I reached out to my students, literally, a post on social media. I've decided I'm going to run for Congress and I need your help. And I had kids that came back from college from all over the country. I had high school students who said, tell us what you need us to do. And my response was, I don't really know, but we're going to figure it out together. So the first 2 months of my campaign, I had just students, former students, working on my behalf. Literally built my website, did my social media, sent out the first tweet that said I need to collect money so that I could run for Congress. Learned how to do field work and canvassing and all of these things. And I have to tell you, full disclosure, people celebrate the fact that I utilized all of these young people in this amazing way. I didn't even trust that they could do it. I just couldn't afford to hire anyone else. So it was like, whatever you're good at, I need you to figure out how to make it work here. But it was unbelievable. Their parents started to come. And, you know, people would say to me, my granddaughter is in school in Washington State, and she called me and said, Grandma, there's this candidate in the 5th that you need to check out. So literally, it was the mobilization of young people in real and authentic ways, not like mailing envelopes or only canvassing. Literally, it was like, I need you to build a website. And it was like, we've never done this before. Then I need you to Google how to build a website. And that's what my team did. And literally, the Smithsonian Institute reached out and said, we want to archive your website to capture the temperature of the 2016 election cycle, because this is as authentic as it gets. And I'm thinking, yeah, because we had no money. Like literally, I remember we had to buy the domain name, and the kid saying to me, we have to buy your name on GoDaddy. I was like, but it's my name. Why would I have to buy it? And they were like, no, you have to buy it. Otherwise someone else will. I was like, yeah, but it's my name. I already own it. And they're like, no. So literally, they were like, we need a credit card. That was $5, like to just get. But when I tell you, so this idea that you had to have seen it done before in order to do it is a false choice. It is a binary choice. And it really is wrong. Because when I tell you, no elected official would touch me with a 10-foot pole until it looked like it might work. The only people, when I tell you, my ride or dies from day one to the swearing in were my students who said, we believe in you. And more importantly, we're willing to work for it. You know, there were areas in my state, it's called the Northwest Corner, the quiet corner, the forgotten corner, where everyone said there's not enough people there to even waste your time campaigning. I was there 2, 3, 4 times a week. I was engaging communities. I was going out to people saying, I can't do this alone, I need your help. Democrats have taken for granted our electorate. We continue to rely on the same people to carry us across the line. Unless and until we expand our electorate, we will not win elections. And by expanding our electorate, that is registering new voters, engaging old voters, going into communities that have disengaged with the process, going into minority communities and saying to people, your voice matters and your vote counts, and I need your help. to change the conversation. Every strategist, every pollster, everyone I talked to, the only way to win a campaign is what they said, is canvassing and phone banking. First of all, is 100 degrees outside, I'm not walking, knocking on doors. And mailers. I had a dozen mailers on my counter that I hadn't even read yet, and they're saying you have to do TV ads and mailers in order to get the word out. I was told that's the only way to move the electorate. And I'm like, but I know that not to be true because I don't even watch commercials. And I have a dozen mailers on my counter that I haven't even read yet, and I'll probably throw away before I read just because now I have too many. So this unwillingness to think about elections in any way other than the way we've always thought about them was to our peril as Democrats. So I just moved in silence. I went out, and my thing would be, people would say, but nobody knows you. And I said, get me in the room. Just get me in the room. People would say, young people don't vote. And I would say, give them a reason. Give them a reason. People have to be engaged and connected to something, because this idea that people will always vote Democrats just because they're Democrats is not true. Is not true. And I think your generation has really reminded people you have to work for my vote every single time. And the way you work for my vote is by zeroing in on the issues that are important to me. So I went into this Congress. So fast forward, it worked out. We raised money. I had a crowded primary. Like I said, I was not the state's endorsed candidate. And we won by almost 29 points in the primary. It was unbelievable. So this candidate from nowhere that people said could never win, who does she think she is? It's not your turn. You can't just come out of nowhere and run for office. And I was like, accept that you can. Accept that you can. Our democracy doesn't belong to anyone. Nobody has been anointed or appointed to occupy this space. And this idea that only a certain group of individuals have the right or have been invited to hold power in this country is just flawed. It's just flawed. Everybody has a voice and everybody matters. And unless and until, once again, our leaders start to listen to the voices of all people, then we have a problem. So I won the primary, came out, and literally worked just as hard in the general election. And now I had all these experts. I had all this advice. Everybody's coming in. They want to take over there. And they were like, well, okay, now you have to up your game. This is a real operation now. You are the nominee, so you have to. And I'm like, actually, no. Actually, no. This is who brought me over the line. And if we're going in, we're going together. And people didn't understand that. They said I was silly. I was naive. Why am I giving kids real jobs? And I was like, because they're the only ones who believed in me. After the election, it really has, actually part of that was very challenging, because then you have to build up 2 staffs, you have to do all this stuff, and people says, well, are you going to bring along your campaign staff? They were dynamic, and I was like, actually, they're not old enough to work in Washington. So I didn't have anyone old enough to take. So chief of staff, all of these people, I had to start at ground zero. But as a legislator, I am continually reminded of how I won this race. And I say that because, hands down, the number one issue amongst young people in every poll that we saw, which nobody was even paying attention to, was the environment. Was the environment. People would say kids don't care about the environment. I says, who have you been talking to? Every poll we did, every town hall we did, every telephone poll, the environment was number one. And I says, and then more importantly, they're willing to work for what they believe in. They don't tap out because it's raining or the sun is not shining or they had a long shift. I had kids leaving school, leaving work, coming to volunteer. I had a girl, a former student, drive from Philadelphia, show up at my headquarters on a Saturday morning and say to me, it was during the Kavanaugh hearings, everything, she said, in my lifetime, I've never had to defend my rights as a woman. I don't even know how to do that. She says, I was up all night and I didn't know where to go, so I came here. She volunteered a full shift and then was going to get in her car to drive back to Philadelphia. I'm like, Serena, you can't do that. She said, I don't even know how to fight. I don't know what that looks like because I've never had to do it. So we really are at this inflection point in history where all of the people who think, I'm not into politics, first of all, we're all into politics because everything that happens in my new job affects you no matter what letter is behind your name. Whether you're engaged or disengaged, somebody is making the decisions that will affect your future. You know, my very first piece of legislation was H.R. 231, which is a bill to prohibit the use of federal funds to arm teachers. I never thought as an educator that I would have to defend my profession in that way, ever. It never crossed my mind. But when I wanted to unveil that bill, I says, no. What I'm going to do is they says, we're going to have a press conference at the Legislative Office Building. We have the governor, we have all these people. I said, so help me understand. I'm introducing a bill about schools on behalf of kids, and we're doing it at 10 o'clock in the morning at the Capitol. Something about that is inherently wrong. We did it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon outside of a school, and my speakers were students, teachers, and parents, period. This idea that you have to be invited to the table has really put us on a trajectory that we can't pull ourselves out of. We are at a point where you have to figure out what you're good at and then decide how you can help somebody else doing it. I went to a pancake breakfast a couple weeks ago, and I noticed, I was like, all of our events happen at 10 o'clock in the morning. So I had a pancake breakfast for dinner and only invited students, because I'm like, how can we say, I need your help? I need you to come out and vote. I need you to work for me. But then once I get elected, I'm good. I'll see you in 2 years. I'll see you in 4 years, because I'm going to need you again. But I want you to ignore the fact that I don't value what you bring to the table. So for as much as young people volunteer and they do internships and they're engaged in that way, I think you guys have to really leverage the power in your voice, because you're capable of so much more than that. You know, and it's incumbent upon you really to force adults to listen, to force leaders to say, there are enough of us. It's up to you to decide if you want us voting with you or against you. You know, there are enough of us. When you think about the fact that 2 years ago, we couldn't even have a public conversation about the environment. Last election cycle, there wasn't one debate question about education, not one. And now we're going in and you see student debt is at the forefront of all of our conversations. You see the environment is at the forefront of all of our conversations. You see job training and skills training. You see housing and transportation at the forefront of our conversation. I used to tell my students in every election, because I taught high school history, civics, and government, in every elections, the concerns of seniors were always on the ballot. Every politician went to every nursing home, bought donuts and coffee, bought pizza, gave rides to the poll, because that is a reliable voting bloc. If you can identify yourself as a reliable voting bloc, we will not have another election in this country that does not elevate the concerns of young people. You know, I think people are kind of starting to say, well, wait, looks like they're here to stay, but what do we do with them? And not really understanding it. So you are at a point in history where you can decide, this is what you can do with us. And if you don't take advantage of that, if you don't stay engaged and stay involved, you're going to fall off the map. You're going to fall out of the conversation, and it really is going to shift back to the point in our history and in our elections where only the concerns of seniors made it to the ballot, or only people who had checked all the boxes and lived inside of the square will even be eligible to occupy this space. We have the most dynamic and diverse Congress in this country's history, this 116th Congress. We have more women, we have more people from the LGBTQ community, first-time Native Americans, first-time Muslims, more people in this Congress than ever before. And what is happening is the conversations are shifting. Last week we voted on protecting people with pre-existing conditions. This week when we go back, we're voting on the Equality Act. We've already voted on H.R. 1 to clean up government and maintain transparency, get the money out of government. H.R. 8, the first time in 2 decades that we had a piece of gun reform legislation. The people in the room make the list of priorities. That's how our democracy is shaped. It's not hard to bring a bill to the floor. You just have to, it has to align with your values and what is important to you. You know, we have the DREAM Act, H.R. 6, which is Dreamers and DACA recipients. No legislation has happened on that in almost 10 years. But it's because, and I don't think I even appreciated that elections have consequences. This is what you get with the Democratic majority. So we hear all of this chatter about socialism and all of these, who's going to pay for it. But what we have done is we are being in a position where any policy that speaks to helping people is labeled socialism. Anything that starts with, I don't just care about my family, I also care about your family, shifts to, then how are we going to pay for it? I have voted, we have had military defense spending budget appropriations bills more times than I can count in this Congress, and nobody once has said, how are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? We cannot gamble away your futures, and that's where we are right now. People said to me, and I'll close with this, I don't know if I can vote for you because you seem to be a single issue candidate. They're not wrong. They said your only issue is education. I said unless and until we begin to invest in education, we will not solve any of our other problems. Because if we are not investing in education early, making sure that all kids from all communities have equitable access to education, they will hit the system at some other point. Whether it's the juvenile justice system, the rehabilitation system, the welfare system, the prison system, they will hit the system again. We have an opportunity to decide when. And when people would say, everything is not through the lens of education, what I know as an educator and as a mom, I would fight harder for my students and for my parents than I ever would. I mean, for my students and my children than I ever would for myself. And I know every one of your parents. When I talk to parents, I'm like, so you don't make every decision based on doing the best you can for your kids? And they're like, yeah, but that's different, except that it's not. Except that it's not. When you talk about clean air to breathe, it's because you want your kids to have clean air. When you talk about securing your retirement, it's because you want your kids to have something to fall back on. When you talk about job security, it's because you want to be able to support your children. When you talk about fair housing, it's because you want your kids to have a place to lay their head on a pillow. So they're not wrong. I view everything through the lens of children and through the lens of education. So it worked once, maybe it'll work again. And my kids to help me do this. They shared things on social media, Rep. Johanna Hayes, at Rep. Johanna Hayes. They shared things out, they tweeted things, because nobody knew who I was. And they were like, who is this crazy person who thinks she can do this? And I know better than that. You know, I know better than that. You know, I always say, I know what happens when government works because I am what happens when government works. When we make investments in people who can't even see it in themselves. So with that, I will open up to some questions if you guys want to ask questions, because I do have a flight. So I'm really sorry that I'm in and out, but it just worked out.
First of all, thank you so much for speaking.
Thank you. There's some good-looking Democrats. I was never a partisan person, but I actually had students who said, we didn't know you were a Democrat, because in my classroom, my hometown is a very liberal community, and I spent most of my time defending Republican policies. And the kids would be like, you love George Bush. And I says, no, but I wanted you to critically analyze the other side. And since everybody in the room was coming with Democratic ideas and values, I really had to fight hard for the Republican side. I said, but it's not about me getting you to take on what I believe. It's about me teaching you how to critically analyze information. So I got outed as a Democrat in this cycle, so, but it's good.
There are a few Democrats here.
A few, just a few.
Any questions for the Congressman?
Yeah, I think just building off of that, I'm like curious to hear your thoughts about like polarization within the Democratic Party, especially within some of the more progressive bills that you've been championing, and how that might play out in the next election, or how that shapes the narrative in your campaign and framing.
So, first of all, I don't think, when you're on the inside, the polarization isn't the same as what you see on the outside. This idea that there's this fracture within the Democratic Party is not true. Democrats have a big tent, and what I think is happening, I'll give you a perfect example of that. Whenever something happens, a big issue in this Congress was anti-Semitism. It kept rearing its head, and people were like, well, wait a minute, let's make sure that we denounce all forms of hate. And then it was going back and forth, and the news is reporting like Pelosi can't keep Democrats under control, and we were all saying, except that these are already conversations that are happening in our own communities. People are saying, why didn't we have an outcry against Islamophobia a couple years ago when they did the Muslim ban? Why aren't we denouncing white nationalism? And so the conversations that were happening within the Democratic caucus were conversations that we're already familiar with on the ground. So people were saying, and mostly the freshman class, if we're going to talk about it, then let's talk about it. You know, we need to have some critical conversations to get some good answers, because if we can't even have that information while we're legislating, how can we expect it to do anything once we send it out? So I think it's a good thing that you have all of these robust voices, because the conversations and the discussions are so much more vibrant. Imagine if you only went to school with people who thought exactly like you. Then you need to find a different room. If you can't find a person to disagree with you in the room, then you need to find a different room. And I think the fact that these conversations are happening before the legislation is drafted means that the outcome is so much more pure, because people are saying, I made sure I spoke up for the people in my community. I made sure I spoke for, we have had more discussion about immigration in this Congress than we had in the last 3 Congresses, because we have people who are first-generation Americans who are saying, it is a dereliction of duty for me to be in the room and not speak up. So I'm not at all concerned about it. I think the product of such a diverse class is better government.
Other questions?
So I really thank you so much for coming. Such an inspiration. But one thing I was wondering about in terms of like education policy is so much of what people will talk about with like the new reform bills that come out is that we're building on a structure of sand, like on a weak foundation. So no matter what investments we do to make things better, there's still some structural flaws that will prevent true progress.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, what do you think of like the future of education policy in the country, and maybe for reform plans like I really love the community school model to like incorporate like healthcare and all these support services into the school environment. So do you think there's a potential for opportunities in that direction going forward?
When you have teachers in Congress, there is. Because you're right, you need all of those wraparound services. And I was in the classroom long enough to know I couldn't teach a kid that was hungry. I couldn't teach a kid that had a toothache. I couldn't teach a kid that was homeless. I couldn't teach a kid who had parents in prison. So all of those things, you have to work back all of those layers before they even got to me to say, and now I need to teach you how to read. So this idea that it is just this sterile laboratory environment where you take a child and you can move them along is not true. So, but you also can't do that if you don't see education as an investment. So the previous administration, or this administration, believes that government has no place in education, and I know that not to be true. They say this is up to local communities to decide. But what that does is perpetuate the cycle of poverty, because the poorest communities who are operating their school systems off of their tax base will never, I'm from Connecticut, a state where we have the wealthiest communities and the poorest communities, a state where we have the best boarding schools in the country and the lowest performing public schools. That's not okay. And it's a small state. So literally, you can look across the street and see a campus that is amazing when you're going in a school with a crumbling foundation. And that's a problem. So we really have to look at it differently. We have to connect what kids are learning to the world they will encounter. So even career training. I had enough kids in the 15 years that I was in the classroom to know that college and post-secondary education is not the only pathway to success, and it doesn't work for everyone. If we are not looking at this is the workforce that we're preparing kids for, and begin to craft a curriculum that matches that workforce. You know, I always talk about, hear my state of Connecticut talk about jobs are moving out. I'm like, we could be like the center of clean energy jobs. Like we could create industry instead of trying to recreate factories. You know, West Virginia, coal mines. Coal is not coming back. And people are not wedded to mines, they're wedded to employment. So if we can begin to retrain people for employment, then we've solved the problem. You know, we just voted a $100 billion school infrastructure plan out. You have places in this country where kids are in portable classrooms that were supposed to be 2-year temporary classrooms, and it's 30 years later, where they can't even regulate the temperature, where they've got buckets to catch water. That's not an environment to learn in 2019 in the United States of America. So this idea that if you happen to grow up in this community, then you are entitled to a free and appropriate public education is wrong, because maybe it's a little egocentric of me, but I wouldn't have went to that school. I would have had to go to the other school and keep moving the bucket around. So if we're fixing schools, I want them all fixed. If we're talking about education, I want every school at every level to be as good as it can be. If we're talking about meeting the needs of students with special needs, we need to fully fund IDEA. So all of these backdoor conversations, these Band-Aids, cyclical, I'm like, not good enough for me. I want it all the time, right now. I can't wait 5 years. I can't wait 10 years. Because a kid's primary education is 12 years. If this is a 10-year plan, then this kid already aged out. It's too late. It's too late. We're done. We're done. Like, you had your turn. You tried to fix it. It didn't work. It's a good thing we're here. I don't know what to tell you, but this incremental changes to chip away at policy, no. So back to your question, maybe this is progressive. I don't think it's that progressive to think that every kid should have an education. I don't think it's that progressive to say that a kid should be able to breathe. Not that progressive. That's pretty basic if you ask me. I don't think it's that progressive to say that before you go to bed you should have a full stomach. Not that progressive. I'm not trying to build a campus on the moon. So, like, all of this stuff that people say Democrats are out of their mind because I want to eat, like because I want to breathe, not that progressive. So I am, I guess, unapologetic in it. And if it makes me a one-term congresswoman, oh well. It is what it is, but this idea that you got to take baby steps, you got to wait because it's too much, people won't know how to take it. Maybe people should learn how to take it. Maybe people should, and the one thing I always said to people, and I say it on my committee all the time, is this the education you would want for your child? Don't worry about my child. Is this school good enough for your child? And usually my Republican colleagues are like, well, that's not really what I'm saying. No, it's a very simple question. It's pretty basic. You're saying this school is good enough. Is it good enough for your child? And usually the answer is no. And unless and until we can say that every school is good enough for every kid, then we still have work to do. That's not progressive. I know you guys are like super fancy, like really smart college kids, but that's just simple. Like that, like childhood nutrition is just simple. Not putting babies in cages is not progressive. Like when people look at us like we have 3 heads, and I'm like, where is that okay? How is that okay? Take me to the community that thinks it's okay. So no, I think we have work to do, and the only way this works is if regular people say, I've had enough. I've had enough. Because I'm concerned about it, so I have to do something about it.
Great.
So,
Yeah.
3 minutes? Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say I would love to talk to you all day.
I know, I get worked up. I'm so sorry. I get
No.
so worked up because I fully expect for them to try to get me out of Congress. So I'm saying everything I can
No, keep
while I'm
going.
here.
We'll keep you there.
But no, what you guys can do. So let's wrap up with this. Stop limiting yourself to what you can do. You can do whatever you want, as little or as much as you want to do, to help out in this electorate, to engage people. So many people throw up their hands. You know, it's not enough. And even me, prior to this year, I've always voted. I've always registered people at church to vote. But this time I was like, we need to drive people to the polls. We need to grab 2 people by the hand. We need to call the people that we registered and say, tomorrow's the day. I had homeless people coming by my headquarters saying, how many more days till we get to vote? Because they were engaged. I think we really have to dig deep and say, well, what else can I do? If I'm doing 97% of what I could do to promote an agenda that is for the people, what else can I do? Whether that's sharing things on social media, whether it's staying informed, whether it's reading articles, whether it's registering to vote or registering someone else to vote, whether it is just being bold enough to speak up when someone says something that is so outrageous and egregious, and just to say, that's just wrong. Because that was what led me to Congress. I kept saying, well, who's speaking up? And so often we see things, and I feel like every troll is unemployed and has nothing else to do but write nasty letters about me and post things on social media. I'm like, would you get a life or a wife or do something and leave me alone? But one of the things we did on my campaign, we taught a class to teach young people how to write letters to the editor. Because the letters that were on the editorial page were so negative, and I'm like, this is not a true representation of this community. But those are things everybody thinks, well, just ignore that person. They'll go away. We cannot continue to ignore that person because they are multiplying, they are breeding, they are sending out a message and an agenda that does not match, not just our democratic values, not even as a Democrat, but as a country. Our democratic value, this idea that we are so much better together, e pluribus unum, that's what, like, the founding documents in this country say that we are stronger together, and we've lost sight of that. And even though we know it's wrong, everybody in here can think of a moment where, actually I was going to stop, but I'll tell you one more thing, because my husband always tells this story. We were in the supermarket, and there was a man who, so in my community, it's interesting how when I was National Teacher of the Year, everyone loved me. Oh, you're the teacher, amazing, hi, we love you. And now, as a congresswoman with a D behind my name, I'm like, no, it's still me, I'm the teacher, no? Like, and people, it's one or the other. So we're in the store, and this person who this is during the shutdown, he started with the wall, we need to build a wall, and it was very apparent that he did not vote for me. And he kept talking, and then he got nasty. And then he got nastier. And then he got loud and nasty. And then he got loud, nasty, and rude. And so we're going, and I'm putting my groceries, and I'm praying, the devil is a liar, you better go, like, just ignoring him. And he packed his groceries. This went on for a good 5-7 minutes. And he leaves the store, and the cashier, the person from the next line, that guy was so rude, that was outrageous, I can't believe he did that. And I'm thinking, no, what I can't believe is that there's 20 people standing around me, and I'm in here alone. And this angry man is yelling insults at me, and not one of you says anything. And then it's left there like, we support you. I was like, well, I could have used it like 4 minutes. So just think about that, because in the moment, sometimes you can, like, I think if one person, or 2, or 5, or the 20 that were standing around, said it's okay to disagree on policy, but that's not okay. Just to bring some civility back to the process. We can disagree. In fact, I welcome disagreement because it is the way that we begin to solve problems and have discourse. Actually, ask your college Republicans to invite me back because I am truly interested in knowing how is your brain operating. When I see kids on the plaza and they have like Make America, I want to say, what? Tell me how. Because I really want to know, because usually adults talk about the economy when you talk about this administration. I want to know, as a millennial who has not even really fully engaged in the economy, help me understand. Because I'm looking to learn. But if we can't even have a dialogue without you calling me out of my name, then we'll never get any work done. And it's up to the good people, because good people definitely outnumber people like that on both sides. And I'm saying, I just realized what I said, but there are good people on both sides.
All right, it is picture time. I'll get you in touch with Jimmy. He runs Republican.